On my 63rd birthday, my son drove me out to the country, dropped me off by a dilapidated shack and said, "This is your gift. You live here now." He left me deep in the sticks, but he couldn't have imagined who lived in the house next door, a neighbor who was already walking over to help. Hello, my dear listeners. Thank you for being here. If you enjoy stories like this, please subscribe to the channel and hit that like button. I always find it fascinating to read which cities and countries you're listening from, so don't hesitate to write a comment. Now, please get comfortable. Happy listening. In my life, until recently, I thought there hadn't been many events worth a long story. I always lived quietly, unnoticed. Even in my own condo, which my late husband Paul and I bought decades ago, I gradually became like a shadow, a piece of furniture that takes up space but is no longer seen. For the last 10 years, that condo hadn't truly belonged to me. It belonged to the bustling life of my son, Darren, and his wife, Tiffany. I occupied the smallest room, the one that used to be a storage closet. My books, Paul's photographs, the old armchair where he used to read the paper, it all slowly migrated there, giving way to the trendy, bright, and empty space that Tiffany loved so much. I didn't argue. Why bother? The main thing was for my son to be happy. Every morning of mine started the same way. I was up before everyone else, at 6 o'clock, careful not to make noise or interrupt their sleep. I tiptoed into the kitchen, started the grits for Darren, and brewed 2 different kinds of tea. Strong black tea for him, and some special herbal blend with petals and imported herbs for Tiffany, a concoction that always made my own throat tickle. I brewed simple black tea for myself and drank it alone in my room, just to stay out of sight. My Social Security check went straight into the joint checking account. "Mama, why do you need money?" Darren would say, awkwardly avoiding my gaze. "We buy everything together?" I would agree. Indeed, why? My clothes were worn-out hand-me-downs, and I rarely went out, only to the grocery store or the pharmacy. All my wishes had long since shriveled up, shrinking down to just one: seeing my son happy. I remember giving them all my savings, money I had been saving for cataract surgery, when Tiffany suddenly needed a new designer handbag. "Mommy, you understand," she cooed, wrapping her arms around my shoulders. "Darren's colleagues are all so high status at the office. I have to match. It's important for his career." Darren nodded, looking at me gratefully. I gave them the money, and later I just started buying stronger reading glasses. My opinion held no weight in the house. If I said the soup was too salty, Tiffany would purse her lips and say, "Mama, you're getting older. Your taste buds aren't what they used to be." If I tried to give my son advice based on my life experience, he would gently interrupt, "Mama, things are different now. We'll figure it out ourselves." They figured it out, and I was a function. The cook, the housekeeper, the interest-free ATM, an invisible woman whose presence was convenient but not necessary. Sometimes in the evenings, sitting in my armchair, I would look at Paul's photo and ask him, "Paul, did we raise our son right? He's a good boy, isn't he? It's just how life is now." My husband remained silent in the photograph, and I convinced myself that I was doing the right thing. After all, a mother should sacrifice herself for her child, shouldn't she? My 63rd birthday arrived just like that. As usual, I expected nothing. Maybe a small bouquet of daisies, which I loved, or a box of my favorite gourmet dark chocolate. In the morning, Tiffany was surprisingly affectionate. She even hugged me and chirped, "Happy birthday, Mommy. Darren and I have such a gift for you. You'll gasp." I confess, I melted. Something warm stirred inside, a forgotten feeling of childhood anticipation for a miracle. Darren was also unusually flustered, constantly checking his watch. "Get ready, Mama," he said. "We're going to pick up your gift." I put on my best dress, the only one that wasn't worn out, a simple gingham dress with a small floral print. I looked at myself in the mirror, an elderly woman with tired but, for this moment, somehow happy eyes. We got in the car. Tiffany stayed home, citing a headache. "You two go ahead without me," she said, waving. "You can tell me about it later." We drove for a long time. City streets turned into suburban highways. Then came the dreary fields and woods. At first, I tried to ask Darren where we were going, but he answered curtly, not looking at me. "It's a surprise, Mama. You'll see." I fell silent, looking out the window. My anxiety grew. This road wasn't leading to a resort, a spa, or any place where a person might celebrate a birthday. It was leading deep into the wilderness. Finally, we turned onto a broken dirt track. The car shook so violently my teeth rattled. All around were abandoned fields overgrown with weeds and crooked utility poles. And then a village appeared ahead, or rather, what was left of it. A few houses sunk into the ground, blackened by time. Not one of them looked lived in. Darren braked right next to the ugliest structure. It wasn't even a house, more like a shack with a sagging roof and windows boarded up with planks. Around it, weeds grew as tall as a man, and the fence was rotten. "We're here," he said flatly, turning off the engine. I was silent. I didn't understand. This simply couldn't be. It had to be a mistake, a cruel joke. Darren got out of the car, opened the trunk, and pulled out my old canvas bag, the one I used for weekend trips 20 years ago. It held a change of clothes, a robe, and a bar of soap. He set the bag on the ground next to a thicket of burdock. "There you go, Mama." He gestured with his hand toward the ruin. "This is your gift. Tiffany and I bought you a house, your own place, with fresh air. You'll live here. It'll be good for you." The words dropped into the deafening silence like stones into a deep well. I looked at him, my son, and didn't recognize him. His face was foreign, his eyes empty, glassy. There was no malice in them, no pity, nothing but exhaustion and irritation. "Darren," I whispered, my voice failing me. "What is this? Why?" "Mama, don't start," he grimaced. "We decided this would be best for everyone. You need a break from the city hustle, and we need our own space. Tiffany is pregnant." He tossed the last words out like an ace, an excuse for everything. He didn't even look at me. He was in a hurry. He got back in the car and slammed the door. I stood in the road, watching him through the windshield. He started the engine, and at that exact moment, when the roar of the engine ripped apart the dead silence of the country, something happened inside me. It wasn't rage or hurt or despair. It was something else. It was as if deep inside my chest, where for all those years only warm, forgiving love had resided, something clicked, loudly, distinctly, like the turning of a metal key in a rusted lock. Click. And in place of warmth came cold, absolute, crystal-clear ice. The car moved, raising a cloud of dust. I didn't cry. I didn't scream after him. I just watched as the silver side of his imported sedan shrank, turned into a dot, and vanished around the bend. The dust slowly settled. The smell of gasoline dissipated. All that remained was me, my old bag, and a dead house on the edge of a dead town, and a deafening silence. And in that silence, for the first time in years, I heard myself. Not the mother, not the mother-in-law, not the hired help, but myself. Evelyn Reed. And this Evelyn spoke to me in a very calm, very clear voice. "That's it. Enough." I understood that this wasn't the end, it was the beginning, and that no one would take my life from me anymore. I would take it back myself. The dust raised by my son's car slowly settled onto the tall weeds on the roadside. I stood motionless, listening to the fading drone of the engine in the distance. When that too was gone, a silence fell that I hadn't heard since I was a child, visiting my grandmother in the country. But that silence had been alive, filled with the chirping of crickets and the rustling of leaves. This one was dead, oppressive. I slowly turned and looked at the gift, this timber shack, blackened by time and weather, with its boarded-up windows. The porch leaned sideways. One of the steps had fallen through, and the hole showed last year's damp, decaying leaves. Around the house was a riot of weeds, wild raspberry vines intertwined with bindweed, a picture of complete desolation, a place forgotten by everyone, a place where I had been brought to be forgotten. Tears? No. Inside, I was as dry as a desert. That icy click in my chest had frozen everything that might have now spilled out in bitter sobs. Despair remained somewhere back there, in the past life, in the car that had carried my son away. Here, on this abandoned land, all that remained was me and a cold, ringing clarity in my head. I approached the porch, automatically stepping around the rotten plank, and set my bag on the surviving edge. My gaze skimmed over this misery, but my mind was already far away in my bright, clean 3-bedroom condo on Peachtree Road, the very condo where Tiffany was probably already figuring out what color curtains to hang in my former room. My was the key word. The pathetic, orphaned look of this crippled house forced me to recall something I had tried not to think about all these years, just to keep from tempting fate. I remembered the words of my late husband, Paul. We were sitting in that same kitchen 10 years before he passed, and he, serious and unusually stern, placed documents in front of me.
"Evie," he said then, looking me straight in the eye, "I'm going to the attorney tomorrow, and I'm transferring my share entirely to you so you will be the sole owner."
I waved my hands then, asking, "Why, Paul? We're a family. We have a son."
But he shook his head. "Son is one thing, but life is long. Anything can happen. You are all I have, and I need to be sure you always have a roof over your head, yours and no one else's." I didn't give it much thought then, but I did as he asked. And after his death, all the documents were filed in my name, Evelyn Reed, the sole and rightful owner. Darren didn't know about this. He was sure the condo was joint inheritance that would naturally pass to him eventually. I never disabused him of that notion. Why would I? It seemed petty, a lack of trust in my own son. How wrong I was. And then there was a second memory, even more important. About 5 years ago, I received notice of an inheritance. A third cousin of mine from Birmingham, Alabama, whom I had seen once in my early childhood, had passed away. Alone and childless, she left me her modest 1-bedroom apartment. I went there, handled all the paperwork, sold it quickly to the first buyers, and put the entire amount into a separate savings account at the bank. I didn't say a word to Darren or Tiffany. At the time, they were taking out a large loan for a new car. I knew what would happen if they found out about my money. It wouldn't be stolen, no. It would simply dissolve into urgent needs, into status, into their future, just as my retirement income, my old savings, and my health had dissolved. And I remained silent, not out of greed, but out of an instinct for self-preservation that I thought had long atrophied in me. This account was my untouchable reserve, my last line of defense that no one knew about. These thoughts flashed through my head, not as vague images, but as clear, sharp facts. It was as if someone had switched on a light in a dark closet, and I saw all the tools I had. I opened my bag. Darren must have packed it in a hurry. An old terry-cloth robe, slippers, towels, and a bar of laundry soap. And at the very bottom, among these simple belongings, lay my savior. An old flip phone that Tiffany contemptuously called a grandma phone. They had bought it for me a few years ago, so I could stay in touch. The simplest one, no internet, no extra features. They had no idea that its memory held the numbers that were now the most important thing in the world to me. I pressed the power button. The battery was almost full. I always kept it charged out of habit. But the screen showed no network signal. My heart, which until this moment had been beating steadily and coldly, fluttered for a second. Was it all for nothing? I looked around. The town was in a valley. I needed to get higher up. Without hesitation, I followed an overgrown path away from the house, up the slope of a small hill. My feet caught in the thistles, branches lashed my face, but I didn't notice. I walked, staring at the phone screen as if it were a compass. And finally, at the very top of the hill, where a solitary, crooked cedar tree stood, 2 faint signal bars appeared. Enough. I found the number for Mr. Harrison in the phone book. Bank. Mr. Harrison. He was the branch manager, the same age as my Paul. He had known me since my husband and I opened our first savings account together. I pressed call. The rings were long and drawn out. "Hello?" A familiar, slightly weary voice answered. Mr. Harrison, hello, it's Evelyn Reed. My voice was steady, without a single trembling note. I was surprised at myself. Evelyn? Good afternoon. How can I help you? Surprise was clear in his voice. I hadn't called him personally in years. Mr. Harrison, I need you to do a few things. Urgently. Right now, if possible. I'm listening. First, please immediately block all powers of attorney and access to my accounts that are in the name of my son, Darren Reed. Everything. No exceptions. A pause hung on the line. Are you sure, Evelyn? Absolutely, I cut in. Second, all my retirement deposits that come into the joint account card. I need you to immediately redirect them to my personal savings account. The one I opened 5 years ago, do you recall? Yes, of course I remember. It will be done. And third, completely block his access to viewing the balance of all my accounts. Complete financial isolation. From this minute on, all operations on my accounts must have my personal confirmation. Personal. I understand, Evelyn. Everything will be executed within 1 hour. Thank you, Mr. Harrison. Goodbye. I hung up. The first part of the plan was in motion. Now for the second. I found another number. Marcus Jones, attorney. He had helped me with the cousin's inheritance paperwork. A young, smart, very thorough specialist. He answered almost immediately. Marcus Jones, attorney at law. Marcus, hello, it's Evelyn Reed. We worked together on the Birmingham apartment. Mrs. Reed, of course, I remember you. Hello, has something happened? Something has happened, I replied calmly. I need your help. It concerns my condo on Peachtree Road. I need to officially confirm my sole ownership and prepare documents that will exclude any claims against it from third parties, including my son. The lawyer paused for a second, processing the information. I understand. You want to completely secure your property, that's wise. Email me a copy of your ID and the property deeds, and I'll get started. I'll prepare an official cease and desist notice if required. I can't send anything right now. I'm out of town and I don't have the documents with me. They were all left in the condo. But can you start by making inquiries with the County Register of Deeds, pulling all the relevant files? Yes, absolutely. I can start immediately. You can count on me, Mrs. Reed. I am counting on you. Thank you. I lowered the phone. The cold in my chest hadn't gone away, but now it felt different. It wasn't the cold of shock. It was the cold of steel, the cold of a tool ready for work. I walked back down the hill to the house, and now it looked different. It no longer seemed like a grave to me. Rather, it was a temporary headquarters, a quiet, secluded place from which I would wage my bloodless war. And at this very moment, I knew that in my condo, in my living room, my son and his wife were probably drinking champagne, celebrating how cleverly they had pulled everything off. We finally got rid of the old lady, Tiffany would be saying, taking a sip. Now we can start the renovation and live like real people. They were celebrating their victory. They had no idea that they had just lost a war, without even knowing it had begun. I stood on the threshold of my new temporary refuge. For the first time in years, I took a deep breath, and the air, though smelling of damp and decay, seemed clean to me. It was the air of freedom. For the first few hours, I simply sat on the tall, surprisingly sturdy porch and gazed at the overgrown yard. The sun was setting, painting the sky in soft watercolor hues. The air was thick, smelling of decaying leaves, damp earth, and something else, something wild and unfamiliar. The city doesn't smell like that. The city smells of gasoline, dust, and other people's haste. Here, time seemed to stand still, frozen along with this abandoned town. When it got completely dark and the cold started creeping under my gingham dress, I knew I had to act. Sitting on the porch wouldn't warm me up or quench my thirst. The cold that had settled in my chest was internal. It gave me strength, but my body had its own demands. I carefully felt my way across the boards and entered the house. Inside, the air was even thicker. Dust, mouse droppings, and old compressed wood. The air was heavy, motionless. Thin strips of moonlight broke through the cracks in the boarded-up windows, drawing strange patterns on the floor. I took my old phone out of my bag and turned on the flashlight. The dim beam picked out a potbelly stove with chipped tiles, a table covered in a thick layer of gray dust, and an overturned stool. I felt no fear, only a strange, businesslike curiosity. It was as if I were taking over from the previous, very neglectful owner. I walked through the rooms. There were two of them. One had a sagging iron bed with a rusty spring. The other was empty. Only some rags lay in the corner. The floor creaked under every step, but it held firm. The house was old, but apparently built to last. It hadn't fallen apart. It had just fallen asleep. My first task was water. I went outside and used the flashlight to search the property. And a miracle. Behind the house, in the thickets of nettles, I found it. An old well with a frame darkened by time and a heavy oak windlass. The chain was rusty, but intact. I struggled to turn the handle. Something squeaked and groaned, but the chain descended. A minute later, I heard a dull splash. Water. There was water. This was my first small victory. I found an old, galvanized bucket on the porch, miraculously not rusted through, and after several attempts, managed to pull it up, full to the brim. The water was icy and smelled of silt, but it was clear. I carried the bucket into the house, feeling the muscles in my back ache from the unfamiliar strain. I spent the next 2 days working. I didn't think about Darren or Tiffany. My world had narrowed down to this house and yard. I found an old saw and an axe in the shed, chopped off dry branches from a fallen apple tree, and started the fire in the stove. Smoke initially billowed into the room, but then the chimney warmed up and the even draft roared, filling the house with living warmth. I found some old newspapers and rags and scrubbed the table and the floor in one room. The wash water was black. I hauled dry straw from the shed, stuffed an old mattress I found in the attic with it, and made the sleeping surface less hard. I lived like Robinson Crusoe, and this simple physical labor cleared my mind. Every evening, I climbed my hill to catch the signal and just looked at the screen. 2 bars, my link to the world. I didn't call anyone. I waited. I knew they would call. It happened on the 3rd day, closer to evening. I was sitting on the porch finishing a cup of herbal tea made from currant leaves I'd found in the yard. The phone rang, piercingly and unpleasantly, shattering the evening silence. Darren flashed on the screen. I let it ring a few more times before answering. Everything inside me was calm. "Yes," I said. "Mama, finally. Where have you been? I've been trying to call you for an hour." His voice had that familiar, condescending irritation. "I haven't been walking, Darren. I've been breathing the air. There's plenty of it here," I replied evenly. "Okay, so how are you settling in?" he asked, in the tone of someone performing an unpleasant but necessary formality. "Settling in, little by little. Thanks for checking." He missed my quiet irony entirely. "Listen, Mama, this thing happened. Tiffany's card didn't work at the store. Your supplementary one. There's definitely money in it. I checked this morning. You didn't accidentally press something, did you? Maybe a glitch at the bank? Call them, huh?" Ah, there it was. The first robin. The first small ripple in the water of their complacent calm. I remained silent, letting him talk. "You need to call and tell them everything's fine. Tiffany is upset. She wanted to buy a dress." I imagined the scene, my daughter-in-law in a luxury boutique handing over my debit card, which had faithfully received my retirement money, and seeing the word declined on the terminal. Her surprise, then her indignation. How dare it? The old lady's account failed. "Mama, are you listening?" Darren rushed me. "I hear you," I said quietly. And then I heard him, apparently covering the phone with his hand, but not very well, saying to someone nearby, "I don't know. She's silent, just sitting there." In response, I heard Tiffany's voice, clear as the sound of breaking glass. I would know it anywhere. Contemptuous, hissing. "Why are you even talking to her? She's putting on a show, decided to act tough in her old age. Hurt her feelings, did we? She'll sit out there in the sticks without a dime, and she'll be back to silk in no time. She'll call us herself, tell her not to be stupid, tell her to go fix it. I need that dress." Then Darren's voice again, quieter, conciliatory. "Tiff, wait." And hers again, louder. "What? Wait? The guy for the kitchen estimate is coming tomorrow, and we haven't paid the property tax. I got a text today about the debt. Did she turn that off from her grandma phone too? Senility is setting in, I tell you. We shouldn't have bought her a house. We should have been looking for a nursing home placement." Senility, a show, sit without a dime. These words didn't wound me. They were a final, definitive diagnosis. They confirmed everything I had understood that day. Darren left me on that road. To them, I wasn't a person, a mother. I was an object, a function, inconvenient, aging furniture that had suddenly begun to glitch, and they weren't trying to fix it. They were just angry that it had stopped working properly. All that tiny sliver of hope tucked away in the farthest corner of my soul, that maybe I was being too harsh, that I had overreacted. It all evaporated in that instant. The ice in my chest became harder than granite. The rustling sound returned to the phone, and Darren's voice became loud again, directed at me. "Mama, are you there? So will you call the bank?" I inhaled. The air was cool and clean. "No, Darren," I said, very softly but clearly. "What? No? You can't or you won't?" Disbelief was audible in his voice. "Figure it out yourselves," I said, and pressed the end call button. I put the phone down and gazed for a long time at the darkening yard. I was no longer angry. I felt only a cold, righteous calm. They had passed judgment on themselves. They had called things by their true names. They thought this was my small, pathetic rebellion, my show. They couldn't imagine that this wasn't a show. It was the final curtain, and it was dropping on them right now. The days passed, blurring into one long, meaningful effort. I stopped counting whether it was the 4th or 5th day. What difference did it make? Here, in this silence, time wasn't measured by numbers on a calendar, but by tasks completed. The swept floor, the bucket of clean water, the first tentative firing of the stove, which filled the house with a forgotten, cozy smell of warmth and smoke. My anger, that cold anger born on the dusty road, had settled. It hadn't vanished. No, it had simply sunk to the bottom of my soul like a heavy, dense frost, becoming my foundation. I no longer thought about them, Darren and Tiffany. I thought about myself. It turned out to be a very unfamiliar and strange occupation. On the second day, I decided to explore the attic. I climbed the rickety, makeshift ladder, expecting to see only junk and cobwebs. And so it was. But in the farthest corner, under a layer of old sacks, I found a small, unlocked wooden chest. I blew the dust off it. The dust immediately swirled in a sunbeam, breaking through a hole in the roof, and lifted the heavy lid. Inside, resting on yellowed fabric, were neat stacks of letters tied with twine and a thick album in a velvet cover. I brought it downstairs, sat on the porch, and opened it. The faces of people long gone looked up at me. Serious men in uniforms, women in simple headscarves, round-faced children, weddings, military send-offs, simple photos in a field. An entire life lived in this house stared at me from the faded photographs. I didn't know these people, but for some reason, I felt a strange kinship with them. They too had lived, worked, loved, and raised children on this land. I turned the pages and thought about my own album, the one left behind in the city, the thick blue one with photos of Paul and me, our wedding, Darren's birth, his first day of school, college. Here we are all together by the ocean. Darren is still just a boy building a sandcastle. And here are Paul and I alone in the park, a year before he passed. My condo wasn't just walls and square footage. It was an album, too, a repository of my life. Every cup, every book on the shelf, every scratch on the floor, it was a line in my story. The thought that people foreign to my spirit were now ruling there stung sharper than any reproach. I realized I wasn't fighting for property. I was fighting for my past, for the right to my own memory. With these thoughts, As usual, I climbed my communication hill toward evening. I decided to call my lawyer, Marcus Jones, to see if there was any news. I had no illusions. I knew such cases weren't settled quickly, but I needed to hear that the process was moving. He answered immediately, as if he were waiting for my call, but his voice wasn't as cheerful as before. It was tense. "Mrs. Reed, good evening. I'm glad you called. I was just about to look for you." "Is something wrong, Marcus?" I asked, and the heart that had been beating so steadily and calmly made an anxious somersault. "Let's just say we have some complications." He chose his words carefully. "I made the preliminary inquiries as we agreed. Your ownership of the condo on Peachtree Road is indisputable. You are the sole owner. Everything is clean, but—" "So what's the problem?" I asked impatiently. He paused. "Mrs. Reed, there is an encumbrance on your condo." The word was unfamiliar to me. What does that mean? "It means there are certain restrictions placed on your property. It cannot be sold, gifted, or otherwise transacted until this encumbrance is removed." "What encumbrance? Where did it come from?" The cold began to return, but now it was different. Anxious, prickly. And then the lawyer said a sentence that split my world into before and after. He spoke it softly, almost casually, but to me it sounded like an explosion. "Mrs. Reed, your condo is being held as collateral by a commercial bank. A mortgage agreement for a very large sum has been taken out against it." I was silent. I couldn't inhale. The air was stuck somewhere in my throat. Collateral, mortgage, how? When? That was the only word I could manage. "The agreement was signed 8 months ago," Marcus answered. 8 months! A picture immediately flashed in my mind. Last winter. I was seriously ill. Pneumonia. I lay with a high fever for 2 weeks, mostly delirious. Darren was at work, and Tiffany took care of me. She was so attentive, bringing me broths, changing my compresses, running to the pharmacy, and constantly fussing with some papers. "Mommy, these documents came from the tax office. You have to sign them before the deadline. Don't get up. I'll bring them to you." "Mommy, this is just a form for the HOA, a mere formality. Just initial here." I remember her slipping the sheets under my pen. I could barely see what was written. The letters swam before my eyes from weakness and fever. I trusted her. She was my son's wife, my family. I signed without looking, just so she would leave me alone, just so I could sink back into blessed oblivion. "Marcus," my voice trembled, but I quickly got a hold of myself. "Is my signature on there?" "Yes, Mrs. Reed. According to the documents, you personally acted as the borrower. The signature is notarized, but I have already requested copies. There is reason to believe that—" I didn't need him to finish. I understood everything. This wasn't just forgery, it was worse. It was betrayal at the moment of my absolute helplessness. They hadn't just deceived me. They had exploited my illness, my weakness, my trust. They watched me fight for every breath, and at the very same time, they were coolly slipping a financial noose under my pen. "How much is the sum?" I asked. My voice now sounded like metal scraping on glass. The lawyer named the figure. It was monstrous, comparable to the value of the condo itself, money I wouldn't see even if I lived 3 more lifetimes. Something broke inside me. That thin thread that still tied me to my former belief in people, in family, in my son. It didn't just snap, it decayed, turning to ash. I suddenly saw everything in its true light. Their plan wasn't just to evict me from the condo. No, it was far more devilish. They had taken out a huge sum of money, using my life, my only asset, as collateral. They spent it, or were planning to spend it, on their beautiful life, on a new kitchen, on a dress, on whatever. And then, when it came time to pay the bills, they would simply let the bank take the condo. And me, they had preemptively evacuated me, hidden me in this wilderness so I wouldn't interfere, wouldn't get in the way, wouldn't find out anything until it was too late. This ruined house wasn't just a gift, it was my tomb. The place where I was supposed to quietly vanish while they finished eating the leftovers of my life. All the bitterness, all the maternal hurt, all the doubt. It all disappeared.
It was washed away by a wave of icy, righteous fury. This was no longer just anger. This was the feeling a person gets when they see absolute, untainted evil and understand that they must stop it. Not for revenge, but for justice. For the memory of my husband, who wanted to protect me. And for myself. "Marcus," I said into the phone, my voice as hard as steel. "I understand. Do everything necessary. Pull all the documents. Prepare the lawsuits. We are going to fight." "I've already started, Mrs. Reed. I am on your side." "I know," I replied, and hung up. I slowly walked down the hill. The sun had already set, but I felt as though I could see everything around me with incredible, almost inhuman clarity. Every blade of grass, every stone on the path. The world hadn't changed. I had changed. Before, I just wanted to get my own back. Now, I knew I had to go all the way. They had awakened something in me that I didn't know I possessed, and they would soon regret it. The news about the mortgage didn't break me. It tempered me, as if I had been plunged into icy water and then thrust into fire, and I hadn't cracked but had turned into steel. All these days, I thought I was fighting for my past, for memory, for fairness. Now I understood I was fighting for my future, for the right simply to live. The next few days passed in a haze, but it wasn't the fog of despair, it was the fog of extreme concentration. I stopped noticing the household inconveniences. The squeaky bed, the cold water, the meager food from old canned goods I'd found in the root cellar. All of it faded into the background. My body moved automatically, performing the necessary work, while my brain worked clearly and continuously, like a well-oiled machine. I tidied up the one room with the stove, scrubbing it until it was spotless. I found an old wooden table in the attic and cleaned it. It became my headquarters. Every evening I climbed the hill, and now it wasn't just a communication session. It was a war council, Marcus Jones and me. He became my eyes and ears in the city, in that life that was already dead to me. "Mrs. Reed, we have filed a complaint with the district attorney's office regarding mortgage fraud," he reported in his calm, professional voice. "I also sent an official notification to the bank attaching medical records of your condition during the period the agreement was signed. The bank is obligated to begin an internal investigation." "Good," I said. "What's next?" "Next, Mrs. Reed, we wait. The first shots have been fired. Just keep busy. They will reveal themselves." And I kept busy. I found an old shovel in the shed and began turning over a small patch of earth in front of the house, clearing it of years of weeds. The work was hard. The soil was compacted, and the roots of the thistles went deep. But with every root I pulled out, I felt myself freeing not just the earth, but my own soul. I was uprooting my past, my blind love, my self-sacrifice. It was painful but necessary. And then, on the 5th day after our conversation about the mortgage, the bomb dropped. In the evening, as usual, I spoke with Marcus, but this time his voice sounded different. It held a note of restrained triumph. "Well now, Mrs. Reed," he began without preamble. "The ice has broken. This morning a courier delivered a certified letter to your old address for your son and his wife." I pictured it. Morning. They're drinking coffee in my kitchen, discussing what color cabinets to order. A knock at the door, the courier. They sign for it, casually open the thick envelope. "What was in the letter?" I asked. "An official notice from me as your legal representative. It states your full and sole right to the condo, warning that any attempt to transact business with it will be legally blocked. And most importantly, it includes a demand for them to provide an explanation within 24 hours regarding the mortgage agreement, which we assert was fraudulently concluded." I was silent, taking in his words. "But that's not all," he continued. "This same morning, the bank's security department, having received my documents, reacted harshly. All accounts to which your son had access, including credit cards and joint savings funds, were frozen pending investigation. Mr. Harrison personally oversaw it." Frozen. What a precise word. Their world, built on my money and my betrayed trust, was covered in a sheet of ice. "Did they try to do anything?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "Oh, yes," the lawyer chuckled. "The bank called me. First, your son rushed in, screaming, demanding, threatening, when they calmly explained that he wouldn't get a dime until the fraud investigation was complete. They say he turned pale and left. An hour later, his wife came to the bank and threw a fit, demanding to see the manager, screaming about consumer rights, threatening to sue the bank. They politely showed her the door. Their world is collapsing, Mrs. Reed, faster than they expected." I sat on the hilltop, the wind whipping through my hair. I looked at my abandoned town, at the dark silhouettes of the houses, and I felt no malice. I felt the restoration of the natural order of things. Justice isn't revenge. It's simply putting everything back in its rightful place. And then my phone rang again. Darren's number. I hung up with Marcus and answered my son's call. "Mama, what did you do?" That wasn't the voice of my Darren. The soft, slightly condescending tone he had used with me for the past few years was gone. This was a shriek, high-pitched, breaking, full of animal terror. I remained silent. "Are you crazy? We got some papers from an attorney. The bank blocked all the cards, everything. We don't even have money for groceries. Did you decide to ruin us?" He was breathless with rage and panic. In the background, I could hear Tiffany's sobs. Not quiet, bitter tears, but loud, dramatic, hysterical wails. "Do you understand what you're doing?" he cried. "Tiffany is sick. She can't be stressed. And you're trying to destroy our lives because of your old age senility?" "I didn't do anything, Darren," I answered softly and calmly. The contrast between his screaming and my whisper seemed to deafen him. He fell silent. "You did all this. You and your wife." "What? What did we do? We gave you a gift, bought you a house, and you repay us like this?" "You tried to steal my condo, Darren. You took out a mortgage against it while I was dying sick. You dumped me here so I wouldn't find out until the bank took my home. That's what you did." A dead silence hung on the other end of the line, just as dead as the silence in this town. I could only hear his heavy, ragged breathing. He hadn't expected this. He thought I knew nothing. He thought it was just hurt feelings, just a show. But it turned out to be a verdict. "Mama," he finally rasped, and a pitiful, fawning note appeared in his voice. "Mommy, this is all wrong. It's a mistake, a misunderstanding. We'll explain everything. How about you call it all off, huh? Withdraw all those papers. We'll come and talk." "Come on over," I said. "Really?" Hope crept into his voice. "You'll call it all off?" "No," I said. "Come on over. I'm waiting for you." I hung up. That was it. Now they knew. They knew this wasn't a tantrum or hurt feelings. This was war. And they knew that I knew their darkest secret. Now their panic would turn into despair, and despair pushes people toward the most insane actions. I walked down the hill. The night was dark, but I walked with assurance. I knew they would come, and I was ready. They arrived the next day, close to noon. I heard them long before I saw them. The roar of an engine that fiercely and inappropriately tore apart the quiet of this sleepy town, and the screech of tires right next to my house. Dust rose in a column, settling on the wild currant bushes. I didn't move. I sat on the same porch where they had dumped me a few days earlier, cleaning new potatoes with an old knife, tiny ones, the size of quail eggs, that I'd found in the overgrown garden. My lunch. The car door slammed almost simultaneously. Darren jumped out first, pale, haggard, with dark circles under his eyes. He was wearing an expensive shirt, but it was crumpled, as if he had slept in it. Tiffany emerged slower behind him. Her face was puffy, her makeup smeared, but she was still trying to hold her head high with that look of disgusted superiority that had become second nature to her. They stopped a few feet from the porch, staring at me. I didn't lift my head, continuing to carefully slice the thin skin off a potato.
This simple, monotonous work grounded me, preventing emotions from taking over. I was not a participant in the drama, but an observer. "Mama," Darren began. His voice was hoarse, pleading. He took a step forward, extending his hands as if to hug me. I didn't pull away. I just kept looking at my hands. "Mommy, what is this? Why are you doing this to us?" I dropped the cleaned potato into a bowl of water and picked up the next one. "I was waiting for you," I answered, without looking up. That simple sentence seemed to throw him off. He expected shouting, accusations, tears, anything but this icy, detached calmness. We came to talk," he stammered. "Mama, this is all some terrible misunderstanding. We're family. Families are supposed to help each other, not sue each other." He spoke rehearsed words, correct, but empty. There wasn't a drop of sincerity in them, only fear. Fear of losing everything he thought was his by right. At that point, Tiffany's patience snapped. She stepped forward, pushing Darren aside. "Enough with this circus," she hissed, her face contorted with malice. "Have you completely lost your mind in your old age? Did you go feral out here in the sticks? What right did you have to block our accounts? Who gave you that right?" She was practically screaming. Her voice, thin and unpleasant, assaulted my ears. "Do you even realize what you've done?" she continued, pointing her perfectly manicured finger at me. "You're embarrassing us. We had to cancel the kitchen order. Cancel it. People are laughing at us. And me? I'm not supposed to be stressed. The doctor forbade it. I'm carrying your grandchild, and you're driving us into poverty." She threw down her ace card, the pregnancy. Previously, that single word would have made me forget myself and rush to fulfill their every whim. But not now. The ice in my chest didn't even tremble. I slowly lifted my eyes to her, just looking, long, intently, without blinking, as one looks at an unfamiliar, unpleasant object. My gaze made her stop short. She faltered, fell silent, but then immediately recollected herself, and her face flushed with anger again. Darren jumped in, trying again to play the role of peacemaker. "Mama, seriously. Tiffany is right. She can't be nervous. Please, let's just resolve this nicely. I know you're hurt. We understand. We were wrong. Maybe this house wasn't the best gift, but we'll fix everything. We'll take it all back. Just call your lawyer. Tell him you've changed your mind, right now. Here, take my phone." He held out his shiny smartphone to me, as if it were that simple. Call, and all their lies, all their betrayal would disappear, wiped away like writing in the sand. I put the knife and the last potato in the bowl, wiped my hands on an old apron, and slowly stood up. I was now on the same level as them. They stood on the ground. I was a step higher, on my porch. "You want me to call it all off?" I asked quietly. Yes, Mommy," Darren readily nodded. Tiffany watched me defiantly, her lips pressed tight. "So, I can give you my retirement money, my condo, my life all over again?" "Mama, don't exaggerate," Darren grimaced. "The condo is ours together, and we would have always taken care of you." "Like you took care of me when I was sick?" I asked, and my voice became even quieter. But in the silence that followed, it sounded deafening. They froze. I shifted my gaze to Tiffany. She instinctively took a tiny step backward. "I remember everything, Tiff," I said, calling her by the name she liked for the first time in years. "I remember you sitting by my bedside. I remember your caring hands. And I remember the papers you slipped me, telling me they were for the tax office, for the HOA, a mere formality." Tiffany's face went white as a sheet. Her spite, her rage, her confidence, it all slid off her like bad makeup in the rain. Only naked animal fear remained. Darren looked from me to his wife, not understanding. "Mama, what are you talking about?" I looked at my son again. There was fear in his eyes, but also incomprehension. Maybe he really hadn't known all the details. Maybe she had even tricked him. Or maybe he simply preferred not to know. It no longer mattered. He was an accomplice. "I'm talking about the mortgage, Darren," I said, enunciating every word. "The big mortgage you took out at the bank 8 months ago, using my condo as collateral, with my signature, a signature you got when I was delirious." Did you think I would never find out? Did you think I would quietly die here in this shack, and the bank would simply take my home for your debts?" The blow hit home. It was evident in how Darren staggered, as if punched in the gut. He looked at Tiffany with horror and some new, bitter realization. She wasn't looking at him. She was looking at the ground, at her expensive shoes, which were now stained with country dirt. All their tricks, all their manipulation, crumbled to dust. They stood before me, naked in their greed and lies. The masks were ripped off. The show was over. "So, Darren," I finished in my quiet, even voice, "do you still want me to call the lawyer?" He couldn't utter a word. He just opened and closed his mouth like a fish stranded on the shore. Tiffany pulled her head into her shoulders, turning from a predator into a cornered animal. The pause was long and heavy. In that pause, the last drop of my maternal love for him died. It died and was buried right there, next to that rotten porch. "Leave," I said. It wasn't a command or a request. It was a simple statement of fact, like, "It is raining" or "night has fallen." They turned around in silence, not looking at each other, like puppets whose strings had been cut, and trudged to their expensive, shiny car. The engine started, not with a roar, but somehow tiredly. The car slowly, almost uncertainly, turned around and rolled away down the dusty road. I remained alone on the porch. Next to me sat the bowl of cleaned potatoes, my lunch, my new life, and the air around me was wonderfully clean. After they left, silence fell. But it was a different silence now. Not dead and oppressive like on the first day, but calm and full of dignity. I boiled my potatoes on the stove. They tasted like the most delicious food in the world. I ate slowly, sitting at my cleaned table, and looked out the window, which I had finally managed to unboard and wash. Beyond it was my overgrown yard, and among the weeds I saw a few surviving peony bushes. Their dark red, tight buds were about to open. I thought that was the end, that they, crushed and exposed, would leave me alone and try to clean up the mess they had made, but I underestimated them again. I forgot that a cornered animal doesn't seek repentance. It seeks a way to bite one last time. About a week passed. During that time, I managed to meet my only neighbor, or rather, he came to me. One morning, I was hauling a bucket of water from the well when I heard a calm, low voice behind my back. "Here, neighbor, let me help you. Turning that windlass ain't a woman's job." I turned around. Standing before me was a tall, lean old man with a gray beard and incredibly clear blue eyes. With a single easy hand, he finished cranking the windlass, grabbed the bucket, and set it on the ground. "Curtis Baker," he introduced himself, extending a wide, calloused hand. "I live in that house over there, 2 properties down. Last of the old guard in this town." "Evelyn Reed," I replied, shaking his firm hand. That's how our acquaintance began. Curtis, or Uncle Kurt, as he asked me to call him, turned out to be a former county commissioner, an old-school man, reserved but wise and grounded. He didn't ask how I ended up here. He just saw. He saw the expensive car that brought me and drove away. He saw me, alone, struggling to make this abandoned house livable, and he understood everything without words. He started helping me. One day, he'd bring a few dry logs. Another, he'd share milk from his goat. Sometimes he would just stop by in the evening to sit on the porch and talk about the weather or the chances of a good harvest. His quiet presence was a huge source of support for me. Next to him, I didn't feel alone. I felt safe. And then the final battle erupted. One morning when I was watering my future peonies, I heard the sound of engines. Not one, but several. A whole convoy was approaching my town. 3 passenger cars stopped by my house, and people began to get out. I recognized them. My cousin, Aunt Carol, from Raleigh, North Carolina, with her husband. My late husband's nephew, Darnell, with his wife. A few other distant relatives I had only seen at funerals and weddings. And leading them, like 2 generals commanding their army, were Darren and Tiffany. Darren looked even worse than the last time, thinner, with a twitching eyelid. Tiffany, however, had transformed. She was wearing a simple dark dress, no makeup. Her hair was pulled back in a modest bun. Universal sorrow was written on her face. She held Darren's arm, supporting him as if he might collapse at any moment. A perfect picture. The unfortunate son and his faithful, suffering wife. They arranged the relatives in a semicircle, as if for an execution, and Darren, urged on by Tiffany's quiet whisper, began to speak. His voice trembled, but now it wasn't panic. It was well-rehearsed grief. "Dear ones, Aunt Carol, Darnell, thank you for coming," he began, sweeping his gaze over everyone tragically. "We called you because a tragedy has struck our family. A great tragedy." He paused, letting the words sink in. The relatives looked at me with confusion and sympathy. "Our mother, Evelyn Reed, she's sick," Darren said with emotion. "After her bout with pneumonia, she started having mental issues. She forgets everything, confuses things. She's imagined conspiracies, imagined mortgages. She doesn't recognize us. She accuses us of terrible things." I stood there with the watering can in my hands, listening to this theater of the absurd. I couldn't believe my ears. They had decided to declare me insane in order to take everything, so that their fraud would become merely the product of my diseased imagination. "We wanted to get her treatment," Tiffany continued in her sorrowful, angelic little voice, wiping a dry eye with the corner of a tissue. "We looked for the best doctors, a clinic, but she ran away. She found this abandoned house somewhere and is hiding here. She refused help, blocked all the accounts so we couldn't pay for her treatment. She's a danger to herself. We're afraid she'll do something to herself." Aunt Carol, a kind-hearted woman, gasped and pressed her hands to her chest. "Evie, sweetheart, what is this? Come home, back to the city. You need to be treated in a hospital." They looked at me as if I were a violent lunatic, a mixture of pity, fear, and a kind of revulsion. I saw my conviction in their eyes. Darren and Tiffany's plan was devilishly simple and effective. Who would believe a lonely elderly woman living in a ruin against a young, respectable son and his pregnant wife who were so worried about her? I remained silent. What could I say? Any word from me, any protest, they would immediately declare a symptom of the illness. See? Aggression, inappropriate response. And just when it seemed like everything was lost, that I had lost this final dirtiest battle, I heard the calm creak of a gate behind me. "May I be nosy?" a voice inquired. "What's this gathering about?" Everyone turned around. Uncle Kurt stood on the path. He was in his usual work clothes, but he stood straight as a general. His clear blue eyes surveyed the entire delegation, stopped at Darren and Tiffany, and finally rested on me. "And you, excuse me, who are you?" Tiffany asked haughtily, looking him up and down. "Me? I'm the neighbor," he replied calmly. "Curtis Baker. And who are you nice folks who came here to scare this woman with a whole crowd?" "We're her relatives," Darren yelled hotly, "and we came to rescue her. She's not right in the head." Uncle Kurt slowly walked over and stood next to me. He wasn't looking at me, but I felt his solid presence. "Not right in the head, you say?" He squinted at Darren. "Strange. I've been talking to Evelyn Reed for a week now, and I see a perfectly sane, clear-headed, and very strong woman. A woman her own son brought out on her birthday and threw out in this shack like useless garbage. I saw it with my own eyes." The relatives murmured. Aunt Carol looked at Darren with doubt. "And I also see a woman," Uncle Kurt continued, his voice growing firmer, "who is turning this shack into a home all by herself, without any help from anyone. She lit the stove, cleaned up, and she's working the garden. Is that how crazy people behave? To me, that's how people behave when everything has been taken from them. But they couldn't take the most important thing, the will to live." He took a step closer to the delegation. "And as for you two young folks," he shifted his gaze to Tiffany, "you seem strange to me. You came in an expensive car, dressed to the nines, but you say your mother cut off all your funds. How did you get here? On your last dime? And you don't look like grieving children. You look more like con artists who came to shake down an old woman for her last bit of cash. Only instead of threats, you're using tears and lies." He spoke the last words loudly and distinctly, and they hit their target. The relatives who had come with sympathy for Darren were now looking at him and Tiffany with suspicion. Their well-planned show was collapsing before their eyes. Aunt Carol walked over to me. "Evie, is it true? He kicked you out?" I quietly nodded, and that was enough. All their lies burst like a soap bubble. The relatives began to whisper, casting angry, judging glances at Darren and Tiffany. Darnell, the nephew, a big man, walked up to Darren. "What in the world are you doing, you scumbag?" he growled. "Decided to drive your own mother to her grave?" Darren backed away. Tiffany grabbed his arm and pulled him toward the car. Their public trial had turned into their public shame. They fled, running under the scornful stares of the very people they had brought as their judges. The cars turned around one after another and drove away. Finally, only Uncle Kurt and I remained on the road. I turned to him. "Thank you," I whispered. He just smiled into his gray beard. "Don't mention it, neighbor. Telling the truth isn't help. It's a duty." I watched the dust from their cars settle on the road, and I knew this was the end, the absolute end. They hadn't lost in court or at the bank. They had lost here on this land, in front of simple people, and this defeat was worse for them than any financial crash. It was moral bankruptcy, complete and utter. The dust on the road settled, and with it, the dust of my past life settled too. Since that day, when my relatives came to witness my shame, only for it to turn into my son's shame, I never heard from them again. Marcus Jones, my loyal attorney, saw the case through to the end. The bank recognized the mortgage agreement as fraudulent, especially after several relatives agreed to testify about Darren and Tiffany's strange behavior and their attempt to declare me incompetent. All charges against me were dropped. I didn't bother to find out what happened to them next. I only know that they faced criminal charges for fraud and had to deal with the consequences of their actions without my help, without my money, and without my forgiveness. Their world, built on lies, crumbled, burying them under its ruins. And my life was just beginning at 63. The first thing I did, once all the legal formalities were settled, was sell the condo on Peachtree Road, without regret. I went there one last time to pick up my most valuable possessions: the photo album, a few books, and Paul's old armchair. Walking through the empty, echoing rooms, I felt no nostalgia. This place had ceased to be my home. It had become just a piece of property, cold and foreign. My home was here now, in this quiet, abandoned town. The money from the sale, combined with the funds in my secret savings account, I invested in reliable, if not highly profitable, assets, as Marcus advised. This gave me the main thing: certainty. The certainty that I would never again have to depend on anyone, that I could pay for my own treatment if needed, for firewood in winter, and for a new roof for my house. I started building. Not literally, of course. I hired a crew from the nearby county seat, 2 smart, sober men. They replaced my roof, installed new wooden windows, built a new stove, a real old-fashioned one with a hearth, and constructed a new, sturdy porch that no longer creaked or wobbled. I didn't supervise them. I worked alongside them, fetching, painting, cleaning. They looked at me with surprise at first, and then with respect. "Evelyn, you're something else," their foreman Mitch told me. "You've got a backbone most men don't." I just smiled. I hadn't known I had a backbone. All my life I thought I was soft and yielding. It turned out that a core had been inside me all along. It just hadn't been allowed to show. The house was transformed before my eyes. From a black, gloomy shack, it turned into a cozy, bright cabin. I whitewashed the walls myself, hung simple gingham curtains with tiny floral patterns on the windows, placed Paul's armchair in the corner, arranged my books on the shelves, and the house came alive. It began to breathe. In the spring, I took on the garden. Uncle Kurt helped me uproot the old, diseased trees and lay out a vegetable patch. For the first time in my life, I planted potatoes, carrots, and onions myself, caring for every sprout like a small child. And the earth, sensing the care, answered me with unprecedented generosity. My peonies, which I first saw that day, grew into a huge, lush bush and bloomed so gorgeously it took my breath away. I remembered how my grandmother taught me to embroider as a child. I found the hoops in the old chest, bought thread and canvas in town, and in the evenings, sitting by the warm stove, I began to embroider. Simple patterns, flowers, birds, ornaments. My fingers, it turned out, remembered. This monotonous work was soothing. It put my thoughts in order. I no longer talked to Paul's photograph. I felt that he was right here, and he would have been proud of me. Uncle Kurt and I became true friends. We didn't pry into each other's souls, but we understood everything without words. In the evenings, he often stopped by for tea with the herbs we gathered together in the woods. We sat on my new porch, drank tea from old earthenware cups, and were silent, watching the sunset. And that silence was filled with more meaning than all the conversations I had had over the past 10 years. Sometimes I thought about my son, but it was no longer pain or resentment. It was compassion, as one feels for a lost stranger. I raised him, I gave him everything I could, but I couldn't instill in him what he lacked: a conscience. And that wasn't my fault. It was his choice. I let him go, mentally cutting the last thread that still connected me to him. He was no longer my duty, my pain, my responsibility. He was simply a man who had once been my son. I'm 65 now. I'm sitting on my porch. In my hands is a cup of hot tea blended from herbs in my own yard. The sun is setting behind the woods, painting the sky in incredible colors. The air smells of mown grass and flowers. Inside, the firewood crackles warmly in the stove. A stray kitten I named Vasya is purring on my lap. I look at my hands. They are rough from working in the garden. My nails aren't as manicured as before. But these are the hands of a living person, a person who is building her own life. Sometimes, I think I should be grateful to Darren and Tiffany. If it weren't for their cruelty, I would still be living out my days as a shadow in someone else's life. I would never have known what I was capable of. I would never have met Uncle Kurt, never seen these peonies bloom. I would never have felt the taste of water from my own well. They wanted to bury me, and instead, they gave me life. A real life. I take a sip of the tea. It is tart, fragrant, alive. I think that dignity isn't something others give you. It isn't their respect or their recognition. Dignity is what you find within yourself. What you reclaim from fear, from resentment, from despair. What you take back for yourself when it seems like everything is lost. And that quiet, hard-won victory, that is true happiness, and that is true freedom. Did you like my story? If you listened till the end, drop a number 1 in the comments. If you enjoyed it, you can support me by liking the video and sending a small tip. I've got lots of other life stories like this on my channel, so make sure to subscribe and check them out. I've added 2 new stories on screen that everyone loves. Thanks for being here. See you in the next one. With love.